Although I first didn't want to, they have been requesting that I do one for over 2 years. Well, there will be 22,000 people there, so maybe we can add some new songs and stuff. I reasoned, but none of that occurred. We played all of our old songs, and they just kind of stared at us, which made it incredibly strange. About 6 months ago, Ricky Nelson lost his life in a 1985 plane crash. Everyone believed him to be broke. His divorce cost him $1 million. Everyone owed him money. When he passed away, his children would inherit nothing except debt. After his brother discovered a hidden will, lawyers examined it and discovered something startling. Record companies stole from him for years. His 4 children became wealthy as a result of the subsequent event. The judge was astounded by the staggering magnitude of the settlement. However, one son received nothing. You will be astounded at the explanation for this. On May 8, 1940, Ricky Nelson was born in Tenafly, New Jersey. But he was no ordinary child. His father, A.Z. Nelson, led a large band. His mother, Harriet Hilliard, was already a cinema star. From the start, the world has been able to observe his life. When he was still in diapers, his family's radio program, The Adventures of A.Z. and Harriet, was well known across the United States. Ricky grew up in sound stages and recording studios, not a peaceful neighborhood. Family dinners can become customary. Occasionally, trips were transformed into plays. It felt as though everything, even the most mundane tasks, was prearranged. It was like always being in the limelight. In 1949, Ricky was just 8 years old when he and his brother David joined the radio show. Ricky would learn lines and cash checks by heart, while other guys his age would swap baseball cards or ride their bikes. Before he was 10, a star rose to his feet. His natural speaking style won over many, and by the time he was 10, he was well known. But he paid a price for his fame. Neither class birthday celebrations nor sports teams existed. Only duty, cameras, and lighting were present. Ricky could not be a child. He had a room that he used for recreation. His early years were sacrificed for the family name in numerous ways. In 1941, the family relocated to Los Angeles and settled into a charming white and green Cape Cod home at 1822 Camino Pauro. It wasn't simply a house, though. After appearing in numerous episodes of the show, it became the face of American television and one of the most well-known houses in popular culture. A few admirers stopped by to take a peek. However, a firm was operating within those walls. Scripts were written there. The practices were held in the living room. The children worked for A.Z. and assisted her in running the company efficiently. The roles they portrayed on television and film were remarkably similar to their real lives. Because it blended fact and fiction, the show was a tremendous hit, but Ricky found it difficult. What was for show and what was real? Ricky's breathing was also very difficult. It was more than a few intermittent episodes of coughing. He was forced to stay at home instead of going to school and seeing his friends. He would become breathless simply by crossing the room. While the other children played, Ricky stayed inside and read or listened to music. He pondered and remained silent. He spoke less than he observed. Later on, he would make use of this reserved aspect of himself to his advantage. His quiet resolve made him stand out on screen. Behind it, though, was a lonely child who only wanted to breathe and feel like a regular person. When the radio show began in 1944, A.Z. and Harriet hired actors to play their boys. But that didn't sit well with David and Ricky. To be able to perform themselves, they put forth a lot of effort. By 1949, they had become the show's main stars. Before, it wasn't truly done. It was a strange blend of enjoyment and actual family life. It was successful. As the Nelsons gained popularity, the ratings increased. For Ricky, it was more than a role. It was his life. Fans were thrilled to learn about his real life. Decades before it became popular, it was the first reality family in the U.S. Then 1957 arrived. At the age of 17, Ricky sang Fats Domino's "I'm Walking" on his family's television program. It was thrilling. All around the United States, girls fell in love. The song sold more than 1 million copies. Overnight, he rose to prominence as the face of teen cool. However, Ricky's life was already evolving into something far more mature off-screen. Fast vehicles, females, and events. Ricky took advantage of every opportunity that came his way as a celebrity. He was wild and nasty behind the scenes, yet he was charming in interviews. His parents, who still desired to be in charge, were incensed by his little acts of rebellion, such as cutting off his whiskers and smoothing back his hair. His debut single with Imperial Records, "Bebop Baby," gained popularity towards the end of that year. 750,000 pre-orders were placed for it before it was even available in stores. It immediately sold over 1 million copies and reached the top 5 on the R&B and pop charts. Ricky had evolved from a teenage hero. His wealth was substantial. His debut album, "Ricky," was a huge success. It was no longer only cute to be youthful and attractive. It was cash. Ricky demonstrated that it was possible for record corporations to see potential in any teenager with a guitar. However, Ricky was also developing close relationships with women, some of whom would have surprised his friends if they had known. She appeared in one of them and portrayed his lover on television. The off-screen action was intense. Looking back, Ricky claimed that they would neck for hours on end, which in the 1950s would have been a scandal waiting to happen. She believed that they would be together forever because he even gave her a gold ring that read, "To Marianne, love Rick." He didn't. Ricky started creating songs with singer Lori Collins, who he was already seeing. People believed he was flawless. However, few people were aware that Ricky was actually a young person living quickly. His parents were rather alarmed by all of this. There was more to Azzie and Harriet than merely becoming parents. They created, oversaw, and prevented things. Ricky's large number of ladies annoyed them. They believed that love would cause him to get distracted. Above all, Azzie was severe. By the time he was 13 or 14, Ricky was earning $500 a week, but his father kept the money. Ricky didn't have much money. His father did not wish for him to be pampered. He also had that much control over his private life. The rumors of nuptials had vanished. Being in a serious relationship was frowned upon. But because Ricky was already accustomed to being well known and under a lot of strain, he began to fight. Secret lovers and late-night gatherings. Behind the scenes, however, he was becoming more and more uncontrollable. He continued to represent America's favorite television family. When Ricky Nelson's debut record became a huge smash, he was just 17 years old. The album, simply titled "Ricky," was released in October 1957. It shot to the top of the Billboard LP list, where it remained for 2 weeks. He was the youngest artist to accomplish that at the time. While some teenagers were singing catchy tunes, this was more than that. Ricky was already well known due to The Adventures of Azzie and Harriet, which is one of the most viewed television programs in America. Every week, he performed and sang in front of large crowds. Ricky was in command of the broadcasts and the living room, but Elvis and other celebrities controlled the radio. Songs like "Have I Told You Lately That I Love You" and "Bebop Baby" were already hitting the top of the charts. His success wasn't a coincidence. There was a plan. That approach was the brainchild of his father, Azzie Nelson. Being in charge of their family's television program, Azzie recognized an opportunity that no one else did. At the conclusion of each performance, Ricky would perform a brand new song. This was more intelligent than adorable. 10 million people watched each week. A great deal of publicity was generated. When Ricky performed "I'm Walking" on the show in April 1957, the song immediately peaked at number 4 on the charts. A Teenager's Romance, its B-side, improved even further and peaked at number 2. There has never been an effect like that. AZ ensured that Ricky only appeared in specific locations, and that his songs played a significant role in the plot. They liked being in the spotlight and didn't want to share it with anyone else, so he wouldn't even allow him go on The Ed Sullivan Show. Then came Poor Little Fool. With its August 1958 release, it became the first song to ever reach the top of Billboard's brand new Hot 100 chart. History would have ended at that point. But there's more. The song was written by 15-year-old Sharon Sheeley. He recorded it even though he didn't want to. Although it wasn't intended to be a hit, radio stations adored it. Despite Ricky's objections, Imperial Records released it. It immediately shot to the top and remained there for 2 weeks. It also appeared on the R&B and country charts. Ricky's place in music was cemented at that very moment. His heirs continued to profit from it. No one else will ever be at the top of the Hot 100, even if they cover the song. That title will always belong to Ricky. From 1957 to 1962, Ricky had 20 songs in the top 40. Only Elvis had more at the time. His debut single with Imperial Records, "Bebop Baby," sold over 1 million copies. Before it was even released, $750,000 had already been paid for it. His agreement was equally absurd. He had to give them complete control over his songs and album artwork in exchange for $50,000 annually for 5 years. A teenager was never going to experience that. And the revenue from those hits continued to flow in. His music kept playing on television. By 1960, there were 9,000 Ricky Nelson International fan club groups worldwide. In addition to being wealthy, Ricky was well known. In 1959, he demonstrated his ability to act. The film, Rio Bravo, featured him with John Wayne and Dean Martin. He was nominated for a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer because of his role as Colorado Ryan. His acting was lauded, but so was the amount of money he spent. Ricky thoroughly enjoyed himself. VIP clubs, luxury cars, and custom-made clothing. He was acquainted with many of Hollywood's elite. Rumor had it that he received $5,000 a month, or almost $50,000 in today's currency. That aspect benefited his business, but it also demonstrated his penchant for luxury. Fame not only brought him wealth, but it also transformed him. However, Sam Cooke rejected it first. In 1961, he received one of his greatest songs, "Traveling Man." It wasn't proper for him, in his opinion. It was a smart move, and Ricky showed courage. The song soon became popular and sold over 1 million copies in April. The B-side, "Hello, Mary Lou," performed well as well. 2 enormous successes in one song. Songs that others couldn't hear were audible to Ricky. It was one of the final major victories before everything changed. Backstage, he was growing irate. Rock and roll was disliked by the elder artists who performed on his songs. Not everyone would play the way he desired. Ricky fired them after one of them even informed him, "Kid, this ain't music." He formed his own band with young musicians that shared his vision for the sound. He was in command, but it cost him a lot in pay, equipment, and travel. The new band included James Burton. In his own right, he would become a star. It was about respect as much as it was about sound. Ricky was tired of playing the role of a doll, but there was nothing he could do about it. In 1964, The Beatles arrived in America like a wave. When they appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in February, everything changed. By April, they occupied all 5 of the top positions on the Billboard chart. Elvis struggled. Everyone else followed suit. Ricky was no exception. His song, For You, barely cracked the top 40 that year. The enchantment was waning. The music was not the only thing altered by the British invasion. The rules were also altered. When Ricky first met 16-year-old Chris Harman on Christmas Day 1961, he was already a well-known vocalist. His age was 21. She was the daughter of actress Elise Knox and well-known football player Tom Harman. Mark Harman, her brother, would go on to become a TV personality. Because they were both well-liked, attractive, and had grown up in the spotlight, they appeared to be the ideal Hollywood pair. But that dream became a long, terrifying nightmare. From the beginning, Rick was under a lot of stress. Az, his father, was in charge of his finances. Chris was raised in an affluent home and desired a luxurious lifestyle. Ricky made an effort to keep up, but the money continued to disappear. He spent all of his money on costly clothing, cars, mansions, and trips to distant locations each year. By the late 1970s, Rick was in dire straits. It was the end of the fairy tale. When they were married on April 20th, 1963, their marriage was not very romantic. There was a gun at the wedding. Her Catholic parents pushed for a wedding without food or drink, and Chris was already expecting. Even though Rick wasn't Catholic, they had to formally pledge to teach their kids the religion. The decision was made for him, not the other way around. He had to follow everyone else and attend a Catholic school in order to maintain order. Although the wedding appeared to be a party from the outside, it was really all about control and putting on a show for everyone. That tension never accumulated. That Rick's parents liked Chris is odd. She was the only girl he dated who was rejected. They were overjoyed to bring Nelson and Harman's families together. Chris was well-connected, elegant, and related to Hollywood royalty, so he had the perfect appearance. They appeared to be a perfect match at first, but that soon changed. Rick had always complied with his father's stringent financial regulations, but his wife now desired whatever that money could purchase. They had no plan, so they squandered money. When Rick's job slowed down in the middle of the 1970s, the expenses continued to pile up. Chris wished he would spend more time at home. Rick had to continue his tour. Both his finances and his emotions were overextended. A $1 million court bill marked the end of the marriage that everyone once admired. Chris joined Rick when they were married, and she portrayed herself on The Adventures of Az and Harriet. She earned money doing so. But when we had 2 salaries, we spent more money. Neither of them knew how to save. They were surrounded by lawyers, agents, and assistants. But nobody halted the blood loss. Previously adhering to his father's stringent financial regulations, Rick was now spending all of it to maintain his way of life. Feeling trapped in a phony TV world and a failing marriage, Chris started to distance himself. By then, they had gone too far. The Hollywood fantasy became a slow-motion stock market meltdown. In 1965, Rick's father created a film that he and Chris co-produced called Love and Kisses. The plot revolved around 2 teenagers who flee together and later struggle to live with the groom's parents. Although the narrative was humorous, the reality was quite depressing. Their work was already reflecting their personal issues. Critics praised the film for its excellent performance, but few realized how much it mirrored their own experiences. Rick was 25 years old, yet he portrayed a teenager. Chris received little recognition for his efforts. They were experiencing marital problems behind the scenes. Az concealed her own issues in the film, portraying them in a way that was more distressing than amusing. It was strange, uneasy, and a sign. By 1969, Rick was desperate to escape the past. By forming the Stone Canyon Band, which fused rock and country music before it was trendy, he transformed himself. As a result of his actions, Randy Meisner later joined the Eagles. Although the band showed promise, their timing was off. Rick used to perform as the main act in large venues, but these days he only gets paid to play small clubs. Feeling stranded and without any revenue, Meisner quit. Despite being innovative, Rick sings Nelson, and, in concert, didn't do well in the marketplace. As his wealth and notoriety were disappearing, Rick sought artistic freedom. At all costs, he was determined to establish himself as a true artist. He nearly lost everything as a result. The event that broke him occurred at Madison Square Garden on October 15, 1971. Rick expected to be loved, but instead he was jeered. He removed the "Why" from Ricky in an attempt to move on with a different sound. Some claimed that it wasn't about the music, so he played honky tonk women. People wanted classic hits. They placed the responsibility on the police actions amid the mob. However, Rick believed that they were obvious that they did not want to know him. He walked backstage to witness the remainder of the performance, since he felt horrible about what he had done. Eventually, they convinced him to play the old tunes once more. Finally, there was a cheer from the crowd, but it was too late. That night, something shattered inside him. Nevertheless, that mess included a surprise. Rick wrote a personal song that year called Garden Party. It was authentic. It was accurate. You can't please everyone, so you gotta please yourself. Was a hit song that reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and went gold. Rick returned for a brief visit. It was his first success in the top 10 in nearly a decade. Previously unimpressed fans were suddenly joining in on the song. However, it was short-lived. Following singles such as Palace Guard were not successful. By 1974, his record label was at a loss on what to do with him. Windfall and other albums did not do well. He started performing in modest TV roles and amusement parks. He was released by MCA. Garden Party was a farewell as well as a victory. In the past, he was the pop music idol in America. However, he had lost control of his life by the mid-1970s. His marriage to Chris Nelson appeared to be surviving, but it wasn't. In an attempt to keep up with their upscale lifestyle, Rick was always traveling. Luxurious residences, premium schools, and numerous debts to pay are all present. However, the more he worked, the more distant he became. Chris felt excluded. It was suffocating to Rick. Their conversations descended into altercations. Additionally, the home they had constructed became a battleground. In 1977, Rick returned home to a cozy home after yet another lengthy journey. He got locked out instead. Chris had moved into a rented home with everything he possessed. When he arrived, she was inside with 2 dancers from the Los Angeles Rams. Rick was embarrassed and astonished. At that point, it was obvious that there was no turning back. Chris blamed Rick's drug addiction and claimed she did it to protect the children. Rick's team's claims were untrue, but the harm had already been done. They couldn't mend their broken marriage. In 1980, they made another attempt. Rick purchased Errol Flynn's former Mulholland Drive home for $750,000. It was meant to be a fresh beginning. Chris, however, advised him to pursue acting instead of songwriting. Rick couldn't do it. He needed to go on tour in order to pay off his debt. The house did not improve the situation. It increased the level of tension. Ghosts were supposed to visit it. Lights flashed, noises were made, and the family continued to lose money. The ideal home became a nightmare. During the separation, things went south. Chris claimed that Rick was a bad parent and a drug user. She said that their children would perish if she stayed. Rick retaliated by accusing her of abusing alcohol and abandoning the children to the staff. The legal case took 5 years to conclude. Just the lawyers cost almost $1 million. The children were in the middle, watching their parents harm each other, while both sides were mentally damaged. By the end of 1982, it was over. It was over. For 4 months, Rick was required to make monthly child support payments. He and his ex-wife shared 4 children, ages 8 to 19. He was nearly broke, though. The court case had worn him out. He continued to go night after night to make ends meet. The burden of everything remained in the mind. His soul grew weaker, his health deteriorated, and the joy he had once experienced seemed to be permanently gone. By 1985, Rick was eager to return. But there was one problem. Flying scared him. He purchased an old jet for $118,000, since he was still opposed to taking the tour bus. It was a Douglas DC-3 from 1944. It had once belonged to Jerry Lee Lewis. Rick believed it would allow him to be by himself and save money. But the plane was a mess. The engines weren't operating properly. The band had to remove it off the field on multiple occasions since many of the parts broke. Everyone was afraid of that plane. Bobby Neal's wife asked him to refrain from doing it. The bassist, Patrick Woodward, has already survived 2 emergency landings. Rick ignored all the warnings, even though pianist Andy Chapin didn't want to get on either. He must have had the money. He couldn't halt performances. He lost a big opportunity in September when his engine failed. On December 31, 1985, the plane was hours late due to another issue with its machinery. Rick was still on it. On New Year's Eve, they were flying to Dallas for a performance. Somewhere in Texas, smoke engulfed the cabin. It was so dense that they were unable to see the instruments. The lead pilot, Brad Rank, had to fly blind by sticking his head out the side window. About 5:14 p.m., the aircraft crashed in a field close to a Dallas landing strip. Before it struck some trees and caught fire, witnesses reported seeing it fly around and spit black smoke. The debris was dispersed across 150 yards. The only people that survived were the pilots, who did so through the cabin windows. Rick was one of 7 people murdered in the fire. Rick was just 45. He was accompanied by 5 members of his band and crew. Bassist Patrick Woodward, drummer Rick Enveld, guitarist Bobby Neal, pianist Andy Chapin, and sound tech Donald Clark Russell. His fiancée, Helen Blair, was also present. Tests were required to identify the bodies because the crash was so horrific. The music industry was taken aback. In his day, Nelson was a tremendous celebrity among teenagers. And now he was gone, only hours before 1986. The next step was considerably more complex. Rick was in dire straits financially. Chris Harmon was no longer his spouse. Together, they had 4 children, Sam, Matthew, Gunnar, and Tracy. He had no intention of marrying Helen Blair, yet he was going to do so. His ex-wife and mother were also present. Even worse, the estate owed roughly $1 million as a result of Rick's spending patterns, court bills, and the expense of maintaining the outdated DC-3 that killed him. For a long time, people believed Rick had passed away without leaving a will. His ex-wife claimed that because she was unable to locate one, she moved in to follow her moral convictions. Rick's brother, David Nelson, then displayed a will that was created just 4 months prior to the collision. Everything changed because of that. Only Rick's 4 children were listed as owners in his will, and David was chosen executor. However, it was unclear what they would leave behind because they owed a lot of money. It wasn't a joke, Kristen. She attempted to obtain some of Rick's life insurance, despite the fact that they were no longer married. In court, she also questioned David's role as CEO. The legal dispute swiftly became acrimonious. Some of the allegations, which date back years, involved drug use, poor parenting, and reckless financial spending. Over $1 million had been spent on the breakup alone. Now, attorneys were circling what was left. Even worse was the subsequent shock. Rick has another child. He was born following Rick's brief affair with George and Crew in 1980. Eric Jude Crew was his name. Although Rick first denied being the father, a court-mandated blood test in 1981 proved he was. He was ordered by a judge to pay $400 in child support each month, but he allegedly stopped after some time. Rick left Eric completely out of his will, stating that the child's paternity was in doubt. After Rick passed away, Jean battled for her son's portion of the inheritance, but the court upheld the will. Eric received none. At the same time, Helen Blair's parents also filed a wrongful death claim. They claimed that poor maintenance caused the jet to crash and demanded compensation. The other guests' families had a good time as well. Then there were more cases. Claims are made by creditors. Jean fought to protect Eric's rights. Kristen persisted in battling for her insurance payout. Because so many people were vying for food scraps, the house appeared to be sinking. However, no one realized that Rick's true fortune lay not in cash or real estate. His song contained it. Unbeknownst to everyone, his past library and royalties, particularly from digital platforms like streaming, were extremely valuable. The issue was that it was being taken by record companies without anyone's knowledge. In 2011, the Nelson family filed a $100 million to $250 million lawsuit against Capitol Records. Capitol was sued for failing to pay Rick's estate enough for digital sales, and for failing to disclose matching income, which the business said couldn't be connected to any one artist. Capitol was making illogical deductions, such as charging breakage fees for digital files that were intended for vinyl or CDs. It was a hoax, according to the family. Millions of dollars were being stolen using antiquated accounting techniques. Additionally, Capitol declined to provide all report data. Consequently, his kids were unable to determine the exact amount they owed. In 2014, the matter was concluded. Capitol pledged to be more transparent going forward and agreed to pay a sum that was not disclosed. It was a huge victory, according to the attorneys. But it was not the end. In 2020, they faced off against Sony Music. The case this time concerned international streaming. According to reports, Sony reduced payouts by imposing intercompany fees, which implied that several Sony offices billed one another. Consequently, up to 68% of the royalties were deducted before Rick's estate received any money. The payoff of $12 was substantial. $7 million, plus streaming costs will increase by 36% going forward. At last, Rick's kids were receiving actual money from their father's estate.